everyone, my name is Jakub Jagodziński. I'm the Bachelor of Archaeology and the Master Student of Archaeology, Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology at Nikolaus Copernicus University in Toruń. In my research, I encounter with archaeology in terms of social sciences, and it's a big challenge and big pleasure for me to give a speech after so many wonderful and famous scientists, so thank you for this opportunity. Well, once upon a time, during classes at the university, I've been arguing with a fellow student about the globalization. He was pretty sure that the globalization is an issue of the modern world, which of course I disagree, and I tried to reason with him. But all I've got was this terrifying look that made me feel really small and irrelevant. Anyway, this story inspired me to write a paper about globalization problem in early medieval reality and in early medieval period. And I decided to narrow the fields of my research only to early medieval ports of trade settled along the Baltic Sea area. And of course I realized that the Baltic Sea area, the Europe today, doesn't mean world. However, in awareness of early medieval societies, I strongly believe it meant for all those tradesmen, craftsmen. In fact, it was all the world what they knew. So, of course, there are some differences, but in general, the sense of the process was the same. And for the needs of this paper, I have used Irina Padurai definition of globalization, but fundamentally I agree with Immanuel Wallerstein's understanding of the globalization processes. He made a few interesting theories, interesting from the perspective of the globalization, theories about the world mechanisms and world systems. Those theories have the great impact on my research. And anyway, let me back to my friend, to this fellow student. He defines a chronological limit of the globalization in 20th century. Immanuel Wallerstein, as well as Inda or Rosaldo, those scientists defines bottom chronological limits around 15th and 16th century, and I would like to prove that. We can talk about the globalization in early 9th or late 8th century, in early medieval, maybe even a bit earlier. And back to Irina Padurai, he defines the globalization as a radical acceleration of the flows of images, people, money, technologies across the face of the globe. I will back to this definition later. For now, I would like you to focus on these four main branches, which are images, people, money, and technologies. And for now, I would like to compare this definition with the colonization term, because in the past, these two definitions were really often misunderstood. So, as Aya Lumba says, colonization is the conquest and control of other people's land and goods. More so, Lumba adds the colonization lacked the original inhabitants and the newcomers into the most complex and traumatic relationships in human history. In case of appearance, the Vikings in the southern shore of the Baltic Sea, we could rather not talk about the traumatic relationships, or we don't have any archaeological evidence which can prove big conquests, but we got archaeological evidences which can prove good relationships and cultural exchange between the local tribes, I mean the Slavic and Baltic tribes, and the newcomers, the Vikings, the Scandinavian people. So I think we should rather talk about the globalization than colonization. And based on this cultural situation and four main branches of everyday life, I would like to prove that the globalization was an issue in early medieval. All of them are strictly connected with Truso and other early medieval ports of trade. First branch is connected with similar ornamentation of artifacts. It is visible on the example of the combs and jewelry. Typical combs were decorated with dotted cycles and grooves. This kind of ornament is well known from combs of almost every port of trades, like Wilka, Hedeby, Menstin, Razvik, and Truso, of course. Moreover, combs had a prestige meaning, because many of them were imported examples. Ornamentation is also connected with artifacts from goldsmith workshops. Typical forms of Viking art are well known from Truso settlement as well as Menstin, Volin, or Hedeby. And great example of this kind of artifacts could be Equal and Brooch or Tree of it Brooch. Second, important from the perspective of globalization branch of everyday life is similarity in technique of production. It is especially visible in case of ceramic production. A good example is Feldberg, Frenzendorf or Meckendorf ceramic found in Hedeby, Ribe, Kaupang or Birka. These artifacts are so commonly that they are considered as a local product. Of course, we can question if it's a perfect imitation of original handcraft made by local potters or a pottery made by traveling potters. Either it shows the flow of technology. Great example of the flow of technologies is strictly linked with knives production using the so-called sandwich technique. Those items were really popular and had many buyers. And for some traces of archaeological cohesion could be seen on amber artifacts. There are, for example, beds with toll hammer or pieces for the board game Knepatal. Probably the main production center of amber in early medieval ports of trade was Truso settlement. And during excavations in Janów Pomorski, many amber artifacts were found, including presented examples. Another important branch of everyday life was trade. In ports of trade functioned a coherent economic system which was based on oriental silver coins, silver jewelry, fragmented silver jewelry and coins, folding balances and standardized waste, which we should consider as a bronze cube octahedral weights and bronze coated iron spherical weights. Very important thing is that the silver coins, which were found on many European archaeological sites, were discovered, were made in Arabic Caliphate. Symptomatic is also that on the east of Elbe river, coins were weighted, and on the west they were counted. On the east of Elbe also were located ports of trade, which in my opinion clearly confirms economic cohesion of this huge part of European territory. And last branch of this everyday life is connected with cultural diversity of the ports of trade inhabitants. A good example could be Wolin, where on the base on archaeological excavations and written sources this diversity is well proven. Generally, discussing this branch, we should focus on settlement organization, because in all ports of trade we can point the three areas: the port, central and peripheral area. And during excavations at port and central area in Janów Pomorski settlement, there have been discovered traces of longhouses, typical for Scandinavian architecture, while at peripheral area there have been discovered only traces of hep dugouts, which are typical for Baltic and Slavic tribes architecture. And another instructive example of cultural exchange is known from the Menzlin grave field, where Scandinavian people burned their relatives and according to local habit put their remains to Slavic ceramic feldberta. Then, around the grave, they put stones in shape of a bow, which was typical Scandinavian tradition. Of course, it is only more or less convincing evidence to make research on origin of people, because at first we should make a DNA testing and strontium isotope operations in fossil teeth. For now, if we use only archaeological methods, we can learn more about the culture than studying the origins of people. According to Apadurai definition of globalization, globalization is a radical acceleration of the flows of images, people, money, technologies across the face of the globe. And now I would like to introduce the term of Viking globalization, which in fact is a bit of simplification, because maybe we should rather talk about globalization successfully accomplished by the Vikings. Anyway, this Viking globalization is flow of images, people, money, technologies in early medieval societies settled along the Baltic seashore. Example of ports of trade shows us only a small part of the issue, but it determines some visible for early medieval trends. And now I would like to compare the modern view of globalization with globalization for early medieval realities. And first is flow of the images. It might be considered as popularization of images of big corporations, because logos of brands like McDonald's, KFC, Nike or Apple are well known at all over the world, and for maybe some of social groups it could be even an object of desire. And for early medieval globalization, flow of images concern typical ornaments from the jewelry or ceramic. Next is flow of technologies. At present time can be observed the examples of cars equipped in hybrid engines, which are gaining recognition of drivers in all continents. In early medieval, flow of technologies could be connected with knives production, which I said about this sandwich technique. Next is flow of people, which nowadays is associated with labor migration between countries and in continents and transcontinental. And basing on presented examples like funeral customs exchange between Slavic and Scandinavian in Menzlin, we can talk sensu largo about cultural exchange in early medieval. And finally, the most significant example is flow of the money, which today we can observe as a development of Eurozone. This monetary union adopted for 19 culturally and economically different countries common currency and legal tender. In early medieval ports of trade, probably also different from the cultural and economical perspective, there were introduced a unified monetary system based on imported from Arabic Caliphate dirhams. And I think analogies are rather undeniable. A famous German philosopher, Hans Gadamer, in his reflection about art wrote, "The work of art consists in its being open in a limitless way to ever new integrations of meanings." And I think science has much in common with art in Gadamer's view, because we can never be 100% sure of our interpretation. It's our way of thinking, which is probably much different from the past communities. Moreover, we can just guess the meaning of things, the meaning of processes. In my reflection about globalization, I showed you the way I consider this issue. Maybe, just maybe, the part of processes in early medieval had the same meaning as processes in our modern world, globalized world. Thank you.